Hello, everyone. I'm the Armchair Mythologist, and welcome to my critique of Disney's Encanto. Right off the bat, I want to make clear exactly what you can expect from this video and what I aim to deliver. This video is not intended simply to describe the movie, nor just to tell you whether or not I like the film or whether I think you should see it. Rather, my goal here is to provide an in-depth analysis of the film's objective quality. I know some people don't believe there's any such thing as objective quality in art or storytelling, especially if that story is intended for children. And to put it as bluntly as I can, this isn't true. To clarify, by objective quality, what I mean is those pieces of the story that can be measured and that don't depend on personal preference or your own interpretation or how much you did or didn't like the story. There are questions that we can ask about a story that can almost always be answered objectively. Questions like, does the plot rely heavily on luck or convenience? Do critical story events just kind of happen? Or can we see a very clear chain of cause and effect? Do we as the audience understand the rules of the world in which the story takes place, and does the story stick to those rules consistently? Do the characters act in a manner consistent with their motivations, abilities, and personalities, or do the characters contradict themselves, changing into whatever the script needs them to be at any given moment for no reason? Now, the value of objective questions such as these is that they have right and wrong answers. The plot either follows a set of rules or it doesn't. The characters either act consistently or they don't. Now, I think it's wrong to claim that either these objective metrics or the more subjective side of the story in terms of how it makes you feel is categorically more important than the other, but they are different things. Now, you might not think that things like logical consistency is important in a children's story, but I have to disagree. Not only do well-written and logically consistent stories tend to be more satisfying, but they also generally handle their messages and themes in a much more competent and believable way. So, I will be laying out here my analysis of the objective quality of Disney's Encanto, giving particular attention to the quality of the writing. We'll be going through the film scene by scene, pointing out what the script does well and where it falls short. I will then summarize the plot, each of the major characters, analyzing their consistency and progression, or lack thereof. I am most interested here in how well the story functions and how the movie presents its message or themes, whatever they may be. I'll pause here real quickly and just define some of the terms that I'm going to be using. If you're familiar with the YouTuber Random Film Talk, which you should be because his breakdowns are excellent, these are the same terms and definitions that he often uses in his reviews. I find them extremely useful, so, if you're going to steal from the best. So here we go. I will use the term convenience to refer to something that happens essentially due to blind luck. A convenience is something that is technically possible, but it's not likely, and we don't get to see the cause that led to the effect. For example, when characters just run into the exact person that they need to meet completely by accident without any rhyme or reason, that's a convenience. Convenience in a story isn't always a problem. Coincidences do happen in real life, but stories that rely too heavily on convenience for crucial plot moments tend to feel very unsatisfying and might even be accidentally funny. I'll use the term contrivance to refer to characters behaving or events proceeding in a way that is unnatural or forced. You can think of a contrivance as anything that allows the audience to sort of see the writer's fingerprints, as it were. We can see what the writer is trying to do, and our immersion in the story is broken or weakened because events or the dialogue don't follow naturally. An example could be when characters speak or act in a way that they wouldn't normally do in order to manufacture artificial drama or to force events to happen into the certain way that the writer wants. A contrivance can also be something that is possible, but it is perhaps not properly set up beforehand. Like if the big bad wolf were to blow down all of the little pigs' houses only to find that, oh no, one of the pigs is a wizard and he blasts the wolf away with a firebolt. Is that possible? Sure, but it came out of nowhere, and it begs the question as to why the pig didn't do it sooner. Contrivances are things that could possibly happen, but they either would not happen as depicted, or they are not properly set up to happen. Contrivances can be especially damaging when they involve characters acting in a way contrary to their own personality, motivations, or abilities as established by the story, so as to advance the goals of the writer in an unnatural or forced way, rather than advancing the goals of the characters. I will use the term plot gap whenever there are unanswered questions about how or why crucial plot events happen. For example, in the film Independence Day, spoilers ahead by the way, The heroes manage to defeat the unstoppable alien menace by uploading a computer virus to the mothership that causes all of the alien shields all over the world to go down, making their ships vulnerable. Now, why in the world would this even be possible? How could you design, apparently in a few hours at most, a computer virus that would disable alien shields? Why is this guy's laptop even compatible with alien hardware? This is an alien species capable of interstellar travel. Why would human technology even be capable of doing this? And why don't the aliens have any kind of antivirus countermeasures whatsoever? And if they do have them, then how did they fail so catastrophically? None of this makes any sense. It would be like getting your iPhone hacked by Conan the Barbarian. Well, we just kind of have to assume that it's possible, or the rest of the movie doesn't make any sense. We as the audience have to assume that there are somehow reasonable answers to these questions, but the movie doesn't provide them. I know that there's a deleted scene that attempts to address this, but if it's not in the film, it doesn't count. As it stands, it's not strictly impossible that the humans could infect the mothership with a computer virus, but how it's possible isn't explained, and so it's a big old plot gap, and it stretches credulity. Like conveniences and contrivances, plot gaps are not necessarily crippling to a story. For instance, in Independence Day, we know that the government has secretly had access to a crashed alien fighter for years and has studied it extensively. It's implied that this is how the humans learned everything they know about the aliens. This doesn't really explain how they managed to create a virus so quickly, nor why it was so devastatingly effective, but it at least allows us to shrug and go, well, I guess they just sort of figured it out, and we can go on enjoying the movie. It's plausible, but it's not really explained, and because it's crucial to the story, it's a plot gap. I love you, Independence Day, you beautiful mess of a film. Finally, I will use the term plot hole to refer to events that are outright contradictory or impossible based on the rules established by the story. For example, in Disney's Hercules, Hades, the god of the underworld, wants to have baby Hercules killed. He sends 2 minions to do it, they fail, and unwilling to admit their failure to their master, they lie, assuring Hades that Hercules is, in fact, dead. I guess I should have given a spoiler warning here, but come on, the movie is called Hercules. He's not going to die in the first 5 minutes. Anyway, Hades, god of the underworld, believes his minions and doesn't find out until years later that Hercules is not, in fact, dead. The problem, if you haven't spotted it already, is that Hades is the god of the underworld, as in the place people go after they die. If anyone should know for certain whether or not someone is dead, that person would be Hades. And yet somehow he just doesn't. This is an example of a character error being so egregious that it becomes a plot hole. This basically breaks the story, since Hades remaining ignorant of Hercules still being alive is necessary for the rest of the story to happen. This is also an example of a plot hole being subtle enough that most people, including myself, can just watch and enjoy the movie many times without even noticing it. But it is still an objective error. So much for the terms. It should go without saying that I will be spoiling Encanto in its entirety. The film is only about 2 years old at this point, so I recognize that many people may not have had a chance to see it, and if you do not want spoilage to happen, please return after watching the film.
Hey there, this is me from the future. So in the course of editing, I realized that I really felt the need to preemptively apologize for some variance that you may hear in the audio quality. Despite my best efforts, you will probably notice instances of my voice suddenly sounding very different, and that is simply because I had to record myself piecemeal in a variety of locations. Aside from my full-time job, I also have 3 children, meaning that I had to record myself when and where the opportunity presented itself over the course of the several months it took to create this video. One of those locations happened to be a public library, so if you begin to wonder why Armchair is suddenly talking like he's trying not to get kicked out of a library, well, that's exactly what was happening.
Now, I'm sorry if that was all a bit long-winded, but hopefully you all now know what to expect, so with that out of the way, let's begin. The movie opens with an elderly woman holding a little girl on her lap. She tells the little girl in Spanish to open her eyes, and then repeats it in English. She shows the little girl a glowing candle, and the little girl asks if this is where the magic comes from. The woman explains that the candle contains the miracle that was given to their family, and the little girl asks how they got their miracle. The old woman says that when she was a young mother, she and her 3 children and your abuelo Pedro were forced to flee their home. As they fled, Pedro turned around to confront a group of horsemen pursuing the refugees. The woman says he was lost, and although the visual depiction is somewhat vague, it is strongly implied that Pedro was killed by the pursuers. At the moment of his death, the young mother's candle somehow became magical so that it would never go out. This magical candle also caused mountains to spring out of the ground, creating a sheltered valley for the refugees and a magical living house for the family. The old woman calls the magical place there Encanto. As the three children grew and came of age, the magic of the house gave each of the children a special gift, some kind of magical or supernatural ability. These magical powers were passed on to the next generation, each of whom also received some kind of special ability that together have turned their new home into a paradise. The little girl, who is evidently the elderly woman's granddaughter, has just come of age, and it is now time for her to receive her own magical gift from the magical candle. Her grandmother assures her that her gift will strengthen their community and family, and she should use it to make her family proud. She says, "You are a wonder, Mirabel Madrigal. Whatever gift awaits will be just as special as you." Little Mirabel, surrounded by friends and family, reaches toward a magical glowing door, presumably to receive her gift, and we cut to the title screen. Now, this opening scene takes slightly less than 4 minutes, and I have to praise the film for making very efficient use of that time. The script makes clear immediately that magic will play a large role in this story. We are given the circumstances under which the magic began, and we are made to understand that it gives a unique ability to each member of this particular family, of which there are 3 generations. Exactly why Pedro's death would spawn a magical candle and why the magic of that candle would behave as it does is not explained. However, as this is the introduction to the world in which the story takes place, I can accept that it just is this way. We learn that the house itself is magical and alive, and that the family calls it casita. We are told that the surrounding community is composed of refugees and presumably their descendants, although refugees from where and for what reason is not explained. We are told that the grandmother was widowed as a young mother during the escape, and that she has taken great pains to raise her descendants within the magic that seemingly came about as a result of her husband's sacrifice. This story is obviously meant to take place in a Spanish-speaking location, but because this is the English version of the movie, it will be important that those who do not speak Spanish are not left behind or confused. In this introduction, there are 3 primary mechanisms that the script uses in order to accomplish this. The first is to have a Spanish phrase followed by a direct English translation, such as the opening line, "Abre los ojos," which is immediately followed by "Open your eyes." In other instances, the script adds context clues, such as the words Encanto and Casita, which are not directly translated, but from context it can be inferred that these words refer to the magic and the living house, respectively. Now, I happen to speak Spanish myself, so I can't exactly say from my own experience how easy or difficult it is to follow along, but at least for this introductory scene, I think that even those members of the audience with no knowledge of Spanish are not in significant danger of being confused. So, thus far, I think the bilingualism has been handled well. Moving on, it may seem strange that the grandmother in this scene is explaining things to little Mirabel that she presumably already knows. In fact, we know that Mirabel has heard this story before because she keeps making these excited little interjections throughout the story that make it obvious that she already knows all about the candle and the magic and the gifts. Normally, it is not good to have characters say things to each other that both of them already know, simply as a cheap way of providing information to the audience, because people generally do not talk this way. However, as this moment appears to be something of a rite of passage for Mirabel, and considering that children rarely object to hearing the same stories over and over again, I consider it reasonable that the grandmother would in this moment be recounting the family history to her granddaughter as a part of preparing her for this ceremony, so in this instance, I don't actually consider this to be a problem. In short, I think basically everything in this introduction was well done. This introduction is essentially a huge exposition dump, but that's not unusual for an introduction, and the information is delivered by way of a dialogue that is perfectly natural under the circumstances. It's not often easy to accomplish so much within a single short scene, so props to the writers for pulling this off. Also, real briefly, I don't usually get hung up on visuals, but I will say that superficially, the movie looks great. It is a colorful and vibrant world, and the art style and animations are very pleasing to the eye. All of the characters do have that weird thing, though, where their eyes are absolutely colossal compared to the rest of their face. It's a cheap attempt to make us empathize with the characters by having them look all cute and babyish, and whether it works is up to the person, I suppose. Usually this sort of thing annoys me, but in fairness, this little kid is actually adorable, so I guess it's fine. So I thought that it would be useful as we go along to summarize each scene in terms of how the plot advances, how the characters are developed, any miscellaneous issues that need to be discussed in terms of things like presentation or the handling of themes, and any questions that arise with regard to these things. So, in this opening scene, we learn that the villagers were expelled from their home many years ago for some reason. We learn that Pedro, who is the grandmother's husband and Mirabel's grandfather, died in the escape, which resulted in the creation of a magical candle, or Encanto. We learn that this magical candle protected the refugees and gave magical abilities to this grandmother's descendants. And we learn that her granddaughter Mirabel has just come of age and receives her gift today. Some questions that arise from this scene are: why were the villagers forced to leave? Why did Pedro's death create a magical candle, and what is the source of the magic? In terms of characters, we have the grandmother. We learn that she is a widow and that she is devoted to her family and the magic of their Encanto. We have Abuelo Pedro, the grandmother's late husband, who died trying to protect his wife and children. And finally, we have Mirabel, who is young, inquisitive, and received her magical gift today. The natural question, of course, is what gift did Mirabel receive? This scene makes very efficient use of time, provides translations and or context clues for Spanish words, and so far, the film looks beautiful. There's one more observation I wanted to point out, which is that the magical candle very closely resembles a prayer candle, such as those used by practicing Catholics. It isn't obvious at this point in the film what the significance of this imagery is, but I'm pointing it out now because it will become relevant later. So, moving on, the title screen fades and we go right into the first song of the film. For the purposes of this critique, I won't be judging or evaluating the music in any great detail, except insofar as the lyrics of any particular song are relevant to the plot or the characters. I will essentially be treating the songs as if they were spoken dialogue. However, there is a reason why this film received such critical and popular acclaim for its music. In a word, the music is fantastic. Lin-Manuel Miranda did an excellent job, and his music is a huge part of why this film received as much praise as it did. Now, in this first song, there is a lot of exposition and character information dumped on the audience in just a few minutes, so we're going to have to go through and examine it in detail. We first see a much older version of Mirabel getting ready in the morning with the assistance of Casita the Living House, and Mirabel recites her grandmother's mantra to, quote, "make your family proud." She then slides down the stairs, giving a bubbly hello to the portrait of her late grandfather on the wall. We see 3 children from the village approaching the house. They seem to be about 8 or 9 years old, though I'm a pretty bad judge of that, and they shout to Mirabel through the window, asking when the next gift will happen. She replies that her cousin is receiving his gift tonight, and they will all just have to wait and see what the gift will be. The children ask Mirabel what her gift is, and she pointedly avoids giving a straight answer. Instead, she launches into a description of the other members of the family and their gifts, for those that have them. We are reminded that the matriarch of the family is Abuela, who is the elderly woman we met in the opening scene. We see 10 members of the family leaving the house and going into the village, and the 3 children from earlier. They have a superfan freak out, run up to Mirabel, and demand that she tell them all about her family, specifically what each of their gifts are. So I want to talk about these kids for just a second. These children presumably have grown up in the village, as the mountains created by the Encanto would presumably limit emigration. And the kids also seem to already be aware that the members of the Madrigal family possess magical powers. As we are about to see, the various members of the family go into the village to use their gifts for the benefit of the community, and presumably they have been doing this for many years. Therefore, it is a bit strange to me that these children seem to recognize and be ecstatic fans of the family Madrigal, are aware that the family has magic powers, but yet don't know the names of anyone in the family or what their powers are. Now, all of this is possible, but it seems unlikely. Obviously, the reason these children are in the scene is to give Mirabel someone within the story to whom she can sing her song, rather than having her simply sing to herself or to the audience. These children serve no other purpose. I know that children can be very selective about what they remember, and children also don't seem to mind being told things over and over again that they already know, so I don't really consider these three kids acting this way to be a serious problem, but it does seem at least slightly contrived. Moving on, Mirabelle obliges the children by naming each member of her family and describing their magical gifts. And here we run into what I consider to be a much more serious problem. There are 11 people in this family, including one person who we will not meet until much later in the film. This means that within this one song, which lasts only a few minutes, Mirabelle needs to introduce us to 10 other characters, their relations within the family, and their magical gifts. So let's see how she does. She first introduces her Tia Pepa, and I have to make another minor criticism here. Mirabelle is standing in front of a mural depicting the family, from which we can visually infer that Pepa is in the second generation. This is a great visual cue, and those in the audience who speak Spanish also know that Tia means aunt, so this is an additional audio cue to go along with the visual cue as to where Pepa sits in the family tree. Those in the audience who do not speak Spanish do not get this additional audio cue, and I do not think that this mural is enough of a context clue to make it clear what Pepa's relationship to Mirabel is. Those who don't know any Spanish will likely not even realize that Tia is a family title and is not part of this character's name. The reason I mention this is that the tempo of this song is extremely fast and a lot of information is going to be dumped on the audience very quickly, so every word that the audience does not comprehend is an opportunity for confusion. I know that the first time I watched this movie, even by the end of the film, I still couldn't remember some of the characters' names and where they fit in the family, and this is despite the fact that I do speak Spanish. I know that this is an anecdote, but I am probably not the only person who had this experience. So this would be an example of where I think the bilingualism of the film can get in the way of its storytelling. Anyway, we are told and shown that Peppa's gift is that her mood affects the weather. It is sunny when she is happy and rainy when she is upset, etc. Mirabel next introduces her Tio Bruno, to which the entire village responds in unison. We don't talk about Bruno. She says that Bruno could see the future and that one day he disappeared. That is all the information we are going to get about Bruno for the time being, and here again, those in the audience who do not know what Tio means will miss out on the additional cue that Bruno is Mirabel's uncle and thus Pepa's brother. Next, Mirabel introduces her mother, Julieta, whose power is that she can heal people by feeding them. It's not clear whether she has to actually cook the food or whether she has to be the one to place the food directly into the person's mouth or something, but since this power actually ends up being completely irrelevant to the plot, the lack of clarity here about how exactly her gift functions doesn't actually end up being important at all. Next, we meet Tio Felix, who is married to Pepa, and the next is Julieta's husband and Mirabel's father, who for the moment remains unnamed. But he does get a fantastic mustache, so that will have to do for now. Abuela then gets a verse of her own. I will simply read her verse in its entirety as it provides vital information about her character. She says, quote, "We swear to always serve those around us and earn the miracle that somehow found us. The town keeps growing, world keeps turning, but work and dedication will keep the miracle burning, and each new generation must keep the miracle burning." So, first of all, it's hilarious to me that Lin-Manuel Miranda's music is so good that he can get away with rhyming burning with burning. But furthermore, from a character standpoint, this is excellent. We learn that Abuela believes that the miracle that saved her life and those of her 3 children, the same miracle that built her home, gave supernatural gifts to her descendants, and presumably continues to keep the town safe. This Encanto is something she considers to be a gift that carries a responsibility with it. She believes that it is the family's duty to serve others, and throughout this scene we have seen each member of the family doing just that. Well, most of them. With great power comes great responsibility and all that. Crucially, Abuela also says that work and dedication are what will keep the miracle burning, and that this responsibility is passed on to each generation of the family. This line could be interpreted as merely a rephrasing of the first, namely, they feel a responsibility to work hard and do good with the gifts that they have been given. But this line about work and dedication could also be interpreted to mean that some degree of maintenance is required in order for the magic to continue to function. Should the family slacken in their work and dedication, presumably the miracle may stop burning, or that there is something each successive generation needs to do in order to maintain the miracle, which, if they fail to do, will cause the magic to stop burning. At least it seems that Abuela believes this to be true. The idea that the magic is in jeopardy of being lost or weakened if certain responsibilities are not met is only hinted at here, but it will become important later. So, the three hyperactive, inquisitive children then ask Mirabel about the grandchildren of the family, complaining, quite rightly I think, that there are too many to keep them all straight. Anyway, Mirabel then introduces each of the Madrigal grandchildren. Her cousin Dolores has super hearing, Camilo can shapeshift, and Antonio gets his gift today, having apparently just come of age. We are not explicitly told that these three are the children of Felix and Peppa, but as Bruno is missing, and no mention is ever made of his having a wife, those members of the audience that have been following along and taking notes will be able to infer that this is the case. Again, the context is there, it's just easy for the audience to miss it due to the pacing of the song. We next meet Mirabel's sisters, Isabella and Luisa. Isabella is described as graceful, perfect in every way, and a perfect golden child. Isabella's magical gift is the ability to make flowers and other plant life appear out of thin air. It isn't clear exactly what this has to do with being perfect, so for now I'll just say that we will be revisiting this question in future.
Louisa, on the other hand, is nice and simple. She's super strong. And for now, that's all we get.
Having introduced the members of her family, Mirabel then attempts to leave the scene when one of the children asks her, "But what's your gift?" Mirabel tries to dodge the question and beats a hasty retreat while distracting the kids by repeating her introduction of the rest of the family. At least, that's what I assumed she was trying to do, but after watching this scene half a dozen times, I still had no idea what on earth she was saying. The tempo of this whole song is pretty fast, and as I said, there's a lot of information being dumped on the audience very quickly, but this final verse is the only part that I found to be completely incomprehensible. I mean, just listen to this. Now, maybe you can understand that, but even after half a dozen watchings, I eventually had to throw in the towel and just look up the lyrics to figure out what I was missing. Fortunately, it isn't much. All we really learn from this super speed babble is that Mirabel's father is named Augustine, he is accident prone, and that there is some guy named Mariano who wants to marry Isabella. All this information is repeated later in the movie, so it isn't actually necessary for the audience to catch it here. I will only say that subjectively, it is extremely frustrating as a viewer to be unable to understand what characters are saying. And I additionally feel sorry for those English speakers who are feeling confused at this point simply because they don't know what Dios, Abuelas, Primos, and Arepas are. Actually, I feel sorry for anybody who doesn't know what an arepa is because those things are fantastic. Anyway, the song comes to an abrupt end as the pesky little kids demanded increasingly shrill voices to know about Mirabel's gift. Abuela notices the commotion and asks Mirabel what she's doing. One of the nosy kids exclaims that she was about to tell us about her super awesome gift, whereupon Cousin Dolores pokes her head out of the door and drops a hot truth bomb.
Oh, Mirabel didn't get one.
So let's recap. This scene doesn't do much in terms of advancing the plot, except to show us that several years have passed since the opening, and that during that time the Madrigal family has made a habit of using their gifts to help the town. In contrast to the opening, which I praised for being very efficient with its time, I think this scene suffers from trying to be too efficient, and many viewers, myself included, are likely to become confused and miss some of the details. The tempo was very fast. In contrast to the opening, there are no translations provided for Spanish words, and the context clues are present, but they are brief. However, I will give the scene credit for at least repeating the roll call for a second time, and we get to actually see each of the characters using their magical gifts. So for me personally, I could at least associate each character's appearance with their magical abilities, such that I wasn't surprised later on in the film when the redhead in the yellow dress was being followed by her own personal rain cloud, or when the curly-haired kid in the poncho kept transforming into other people, for example. Most of the scene is dedicated to introducing the characters, and we do learn quite a bit. but that's mostly because there are so many characters. We learn that the grandmother is referred to as abuela. If you don't happen to speak Spanish, you could be forgiven for thinking that this was her name, when in fact it is just the Spanish word for grandmother, something that this scene doesn't make clear. We learn that she has a strong work ethic and a strong sense of duty towards her family, the town, and the Encanto, and we learn that she believes that work and dedication are necessary in order to keep the miracle burning, whatever that means. So Peppa, who is Mirabel's aunt, we learn that her mood controls the weather, and she's possibly bipolar. Um, I guess we'll have to wait to see if the film elaborates on that. Bruno is Mirabel's uncle. His gift is that he can see the future, and one day he disappeared, and that's all we get on him for the time being. Julieta is Mirabel's mother. Her gift is that she can heal people with food, and her personality is very warm and nurturing, a very motherly mother, as it were. Felix is Mirabel's uncle, as he is Peppa's husband, and he seems to be a cheerful guy, and no gift is mentioned for him, so I think we're meant to assume that marrying into this family does not give you a gift in the same way as being born into it. Augustin is Mirabel's father and Julieta's husband. He is accident prone, and he also does not have a magical gift. Dolores is Mirabel's cousin, the daughter of Felix and Peppa. Her gift is that she has super hearing, and we don't really know anything else about her for now. Camila was also Mirabel's cousin. His gift is that he can shapeshift, and he seems to be amiable and likes to make people laugh. Little Antonio is also Mirabel's cousin. He has just come of age and will receive his gift tonight, and he seems to be eager and excited. Isabella is Mirabel's sister. Her gift is that she can make plants and flowers appear at will, and she is described as perfect, whatever that's supposed to mean. Luisa is Mirabel's other sister. Her gift is that she is super strong, and her personality seems to be very stoic and reliable. Mariano, we don't really know anything about except he's some guy in town who wants to marry Isabella. And finally, Mirabel herself. She seems to be very friendly and outgoing. She is apparently quite good at singing and dancing, and despite what we saw in the opening scene, she apparently did not, in fact, receive a magical gift and doesn't like talking about it. None of these characters have been explored in any great depth at this point, so I actually have a ton of questions about each of them, but I'll just highlight the most important ones here. Why didn't Mirabel receive a gift? When and why did Bruno disappear? What does it mean for Isabella to be perfect? And why does Abuela believe that work and dedication are required to maintain the Encanto? Overall, this scene certainly isn't flawless, but given the sheer number of characters that they are trying to introduce to us in such a short amount of time, I think they've done about as good a job as could be expected. Then we get this clown.
Mirabel! Delivery! I gave you the special since you're the only Madrigal kid with no gift. I call it the not special special since, you have no gift.
And he's not even done.
Last gift ceremony was a bummer. Last one being yours, that did not work.
I think this is supposed to be funny, as in, look at the silly man. He's pouring salt on Mirabel's emotional wounds, and it's so funny how oblivious and insensitive he is. Now, I can't tell you what you're supposed to laugh at, but I personally prefer something a little more subtle than this on-the-nose buffoonery. This joke was kind of off-putting to me, but like I said, your reaction may vary. I honestly think that this guy's purpose in the scene is to make sure that everybody in the audience understands that, hey, Mirabel doesn't have a gift. Everybody knows that she doesn't have a gift, and it's strange and awkward to talk about, and she feels bad about it. As I said before, it's not usually a good thing when characters say things to each other that everybody in the conversation already knows. And it's even worse when not only do all the characters involved already know what they're talking about, but the audience already knows it. Not 10 seconds ago, we heard Dolores say that Mirabel did not get a gift, meaning that there's no reason for this guy to be here having this conversation at all. I think there is such a thing as being too subtle, And I can't fault the writers too harshly for wanting to make abundantly clear that Mirabel doesn't have a gift and she's like the black sheep of the family or something, since that's going to inform her character decisions later on. And it's really the central point of conflict that the whole plot revolves around. So as long as this sort of on-the-nose, excessively blunt dialogue doesn't become a habit for this film, I think I can forgive it here. Anyway, Mirabel seems to take this guy's amiable buffoonery in stride, insisting that even though she doesn't have a magical gift, she's just as special as the rest of her family. And one of the little kids says,
Maybe your gift is being in denial.
yeah, this one made me laugh. A good joke that also functions as foreshadowing. Nice job, writers. So Mirabel takes her box of goodies and enters the casita, and we see the family and several villagers getting ready for some kind of party. Mirabel is awkwardly bumping into everyone for some reason. Well, the reason is that the writers want Mirabel to look like she's always in the way and clumsy and causing problems, because in a few seconds, a character is going to tell Mirabel that she's always in the way. So I appreciate that they're at least trying to set this up, but we just saw a few minutes ago that Mirabel is actually a fantastically coordinated dancer, and she was weaving through crowds of people in the village without any difficulty at all. So why is she suddenly clumsy now? Is it because she's carrying a box? I mean, I guess the box wouldn't help, but she's not even watching where she's going. And where's she even taking the box anyway? Okay, it's not a huge problem. Like, I know this box is a little thing, but this doesn't bode well for the film if characters are going to change their established attributes just to match the needs of the script in any particular scene. Anyway, the party is getting set up, and we get glimpses of various family members using their gifts to help with the preparations. Luisa is carrying heavy things, as remember her gift is super strength. Camilo uses his shape-shifting to turn into a tall guy to hang up some banner, and Peppa's freaking out again and is sending an accidental tornado through the house. I actually like this. Yes, it's a bit repetitive since we've already seen everyone's gifts at least 3 times now, but it's also very brief, taking only a few seconds of runtime. It also makes perfect sense that the characters would be doing these things. In fact, from what we know of them so far, it would be pretty strange if we didn't see them using their gifts to help out. Well, except for Peppa, who doesn't seem to be helping at all. In fact, Peppa's little windstorm damages some of the decorations, and who should arrive just in time to save the day?
Did someone say flowers?
Okay, so far so good. Then this happens.
The little sisterly advice. If you weren't always trying too hard, you wouldn't be in the way.
Okay, so Isabella is not only the flower girl supreme, she's also a stuck-up, self-absorbed narcissist who derives pleasure from making her little sister feel useless about not having a magical gift. And Mirabel, quite understandably, resents this treatment at the hands of her older sister. We saw that little Mirabel was dealt a tremendous emotional and psychological blow when she did not receive a gift, and her own sister has literally been adding insult to injury, presumably for years. I know that siblings being cruel to each other is kind of normal, as messed up as that sounds, but even so, Isabella seems like a truly terrible person. This is the first indication we have that all might not be well in the family Madrigal. Until now, they have seemed like a very loving, responsible, magical, and perfect family, but we now know that at least one relationship in this household is decidedly poisonous, and that at least one character has a deep moral flaw, that being Isabella, who acts like she's auditioning for the part of Regina George.
Boo, you whore.
To be clear here, Isabella being a terrible person is not necessarily a bad thing in terms of writing. It does not mean that she is a terrible character. In fact, from a writing perspective, this actually can be great. We are starting to flesh out some of these characters. They are seeming more and more like real people, rather than just a laundry list of magical abilities. They have personalities, flaws, and the relationships with each other are varied. This scene is very short, but in just a few seconds, the writers have created a believable and natural interpersonal conflict that deeply affects our protagonist, adds tension to the plot, and establishes an antagonist for our heroine to struggle against. Okay, so to recap, this scene is pretty short. There's not a whole lot to it. We see Mirabel getting a box of stuff for the party from the friendly and socially inept weirdo, and we see the family preparing the house for the party. As far as characters go, the only new information here is that Isabella very much enjoys taunting her little sister. She likes to show off when using her powers, and Mirabel resents Isabella for taunting her. Moving on, we see Mirabel schlepping her box of goodies into the kitchen, which is apparently in a side room right off the main entrance, which makes me wonder why we just saw her stumble through the courtyard bumping into people like a lost pinball, only to double back the way she came, but okay. Like, seriously, where's she even going here? And if the writers were determined to have Mirabel bouncing around like this, why not put the kitchen in the back of the house? Like, you might not think this is a big deal, and probably it's not, but I'm still just really confused about why they made this choice. Anyway, her mother, Julieta, sees Mirabel struggling with her load and lovingly tells her daughter not to overdo it. Mirabel responds that she just wants to do her part like the rest of the family. Mirabel's father, Augustine, who thinks to the bee stings we saw in the family madrigal song now resembles the Elephant Man, tries to sympathize with his daughter, saying that when he and Felix married into the family, they also felt like outsiders and felt like they would never quite fit in. He assures her that he understands what she's feeling. Mirabel shrugs her parents off. Julieta shoves some magic healing food into her husband's mouth, and we get another line that genuinely made me chuckle.
The house isn't gonna decorate itself. Sorry, you could. You look great.
Mirabel then hurries off with her box of decorations, and her parents remind her that...
Remember.
Yeah, remember.
You have nothing,
to prove.
So once again, I have to credit the writers with doing an excellent job here of building characters off of each other while also being very efficient with their time. This scene with Mirabel and her parents in the kitchen takes about 45 seconds, and in that time, Mirabel expresses her desire to be a contributing member of the family to the extent that she can. Nothing really happens here in terms of plot development, but we gain a lot of insight into some key relationships. We can see that both of Mirabel's parents are very tender and loving and are sensitive to their daughter's distress, even if they don't exactly know how to help her cope with it. I also found it amusing that Augustine smiles and nods here, like he thinks the conversation was a success until he sees Julieta's face, and then he just copies her worried expression. We also get another reminder of Julieta's healing powers, Augustine's tendency to get hurt, a match made in the ER, I suppose. And we get reminders that the house is a character in its own right, with a personality that seems to be somewhat akin to that of a friendly dog. And we see that Mirabel knows that her parents mean well, but she doesn't really want to talk to them about her struggle. All of the characters here act in a manner consistent with what we already know about them, the relationships are being fleshed out, and the delivery is amusing, endearing, and succinct. I have no criticisms. Well done. Excellent scene. Next, we see Mirabel trying to help decorate the house. She's got these little paper flower things that she's putting outside people's doors with a little candle in the middle. Somewhere in the background, we can hear Abuela's muffled voice barking orders at somebody. We see Mirabel pause outside Abuela's door to gaze longingly and painfully at the family photos on the wall. In each photo, Abuela stands proudly beside her child or grandchild at their magical bedroom door as they receive their gift. Notably, there is no photo of Mirabel. At this moment, who should appear but Abuela? Mirabel is startled and kicks over the little candle, which starts a little fire. Abuela suggests in a kindly voice that maybe Mirabel ought to leave the decorations to someone else. She says,
I know you want to help, but tonight must go perfectly. The whole town relies on our family. So the best way for some of us to help is to step aside.
Mirabel smiles and nods, but it's clear how deeply her grandmother's words have cut her. As she retreats to her room, Abuela chides Pepa, who is worried about being unable to find her son Antonio and is thus causing a small rainstorm. Pepa tells her mother off in a huff, and Julieta appears, pleading with her mother to be kind to Mirabel, saying that the upcoming gift ceremony will be very hard on her. Abuela replies,
If the gift ceremony doesn't go well this time, tonight will be hard for us all.
Okay, so once more, the writers have packed a lot of character information into a very short scene. We learn that the grandmother is very invested in making sure that Antonio's gift ceremony goes perfectly, whatever that means. She says that the whole town relies on their family's gifts, implying that she believes there is some risk of little Antonio failing to receive his gift, much like Mirabel did.
This reinforces what was implied during the family madrigal song, namely that Abuela believes some degree of maintenance or care must be taken with the handling of the miracle, or it is at risk of failing. Although as yet we have no idea why she believes this, or why she believes that the decorations will have any effect on whether Antonio gets a gift or not. Abuela does not seem to understand why Mirabel did not receive a gift, but it is strongly implied that she blames Mirabel to some degree, and is thus trying to distance her granddaughter from Antonio's ceremony just to be sure that whatever caused Mirabel's gift to fail does not spread to anyone else. We've seen her bustling around the house and fretting about every detail of the ceremony, and now we have some context to at least partially explain why. Because of what happened with Mirabel, Abuela is afraid that it might happen again. At this point, we don't have any idea why Abuela believes that the decorations will have any effect on the success of Antonio's ceremony, and it may be that, well, she just doesn't know what else to do. Based on what we know thus far, it does make sense to some degree that she would want to keep Mirabel's involvement to a minimum just as a precaution. We also learn that Abuela does not like it when Pepa cannot keep her emotions under control, and that Julieta is not afraid to confront her mother in order to protect her daughter. Mirabel, for her part, can sense that her grandmother sees her as a potential problem, and we can see how painful that knowledge is for her, even though she tries to hide it. This is once again a very poignant and efficient scene in terms of our characters, and I really have no complaints. We then see Mirabel in her bedroom. She pulls a wrapped present out of a dresser drawer and sits on the edge of the bed. She says,
Everyone's looking for you.
As she dangles the present over the edge of the bed, a little pair of hands reaches out to snatch it. These hands, of course, belong to little Antonio, and she crawls under the bed next to him. I wish that I could just show you this scene in its entirety because it's easily one of the best in the entire film, but I really don't want to get a copyright strike, so a summary will have to do. Antonio is clearly nervous about his ceremony. Mirabel assures him that he has nothing to worry about, that everything will be fine, and she just knows that his gift will be the coolest, to which he responds,
What if it doesn't work?
Mirabel says, in effect, so what? He would stay in the nursery with her, adding with a playful tickle that
I'd get you all to myself.
Antonio says that he wishes she could have her own door. Mirabel's eyes sink with an expression that clearly says, I do too, kid, but what she actually says is that he doesn't need to worry about her. She has an amazing family, and seeing him get his own gift and his own door will make her way happier than anything. Antonio opens the present she gave him, and it contains a little stuffed jaguar, or it's a big cat of some kind. She says that she knows he loves animals, and she made this for him so he would always have something to snuggle. Casita then interrupts, sending a clock tumbling towards them and reminding them of the time. The two embrace with a smile, shuffle off, and the scene ends. Subjectively, I absolutely love this scene. The ability of the animators to convey emotion through the characters' faces is frankly phenomenal, and the voice acting is absolutely terrific. In contrast to the previous scenes that I described as being very tight and efficient, I think this scene works precisely because it does the opposite. It slows things down for a bit, and we get time to breathe and really absorb this deeply tender moment between these two characters. And it does this really without wasting time. Antonio is young, he's feeling the weight of expectations and a potent combination of fear and excitement about the future. His whole life is about to change forever, and he's understandably nervous about it. While the family is tearing the house apart looking for him, Mirabel knows that he's hiding under the bed without even having to look, which suggests that she perhaps knows him better than anyone else. And this makes sense, since we learn that they've been sharing a room together, presumably since he was a baby, and the warmth and affection these two share for each other is almost like the bond between a mother and a child. Just based on this one brief scene, I can totally envision Mirabel singing baby Antonio to sleep, soothing him in the middle of the night, or being the first one to greet him when he wakes up in the morning. We learn that Mirabel's bedroom is actually the nursery reserved for the youngest members of the family who haven't received their gifts yet, and that she's been stuck there into young adulthood. Waking up there every day just serves as a reminder of her disappointment, and it must have been consoling for her to have someone else in there, someone to care for and bond with, someone who, like her, has no magical gift or any of the weighty concerns that come with it. And despite her own obvious pain and disappointment, and the loneliness that's only going to get worse once Antonio leaves, we can tell that she really means it when she says that she wants him to receive his own gift in his own door and to move on to bigger and better things. She seems to genuinely love her cousin. It would be so easy for her to succumb to bitterness and envy, resenting her situation and her family, and in fact, we've already seen that she does feel all of those things, and it takes every ounce of effort and maturity that she has to try to keep those feelings at bay. The fact that she's even capable of having this much sincere affection for Antonio despite her own difficulties shows just how much her adversity has forced her to grow and mature, looking outside herself to care for others instead of wallowing in self-pity. So far, I think this characterization of Mirabel has been subtle but really powerfully done, and I wish more film writers would take note that this is how you write a strong female character. In less than 2 minutes, Mirabel has demonstrated to the audience the quiet strength of someone who has learned and grown and matured by struggling with adversity. Someone who is trying to come to terms with the pain of a disappointment that, as far as she knows, will probably never go away. Personally, I find myself rooting for her at this point, not because of what she can do or who she can beat up or put down, but because of who she is as a person. Okay, so most of that was subjective, but let's sum up what we learn objectively from this scene. There isn't a whole lot in terms of the plot. Mirabel just finds Antonio, gives him a present, and then they shuffle off for the party. But we learn quite a bit about the relationship between these two. Antonio is nervous. He has great affection for and trust in his cousin Mirabel due to the time they have shared together, presumably since before he can remember. Mirabel likewise feels very loving and protective towards Antonio. She will miss their special relationship as roommates, but she wants him to move on for his sake. And when Madrigal children receive their gifts, they also receive their own bedroom and a magical bedroom door. Mirabel, of course, has neither. Antonio loves animals, and Casita cares about punctuality. We then move on to the party itself, and we see villagers flooding into the house and various family members using their gifts to help greet or otherwise entertain the guests. The whole scene is very festive, and dubbed over the top of it is a song by Carlos Vives called Colombia Mi Encanto. This song is probably my favorite in the film, but I won't spend a lot of time on it here because it's really just atmosphere. It's not sung by any of the characters, and the lyrics don't really tell us anything about the story, except we learn that the village is apparently in Colombia. Nice. We then see Antonio with his immediate family, that being his parents Pepa and Felix, and his sister Dolores and his brother Camilo. They are proud and excited for him as Mirabel looks on from a distance. The ceremony begins, drums roll, and we see Abuela on the staircase holding the magic candle. She looks pretty nervous herself, but takes a deep breath and launches into what seems to be a rehearsed speech. She says that 50 years ago, in their darkest moment, the candle blessed them with a miracle. She continues,
And the greatest honor of our family has been to use our blessings to serve this beloved community.
and tonight it is time for one more member of the family to step into the light and make us proud. Of course, she is saying things here that everyone already knows, but as this is a ceremony, that's kind of expected. We see Mirabel looking on from a distance, pain evident in her face. Okay, I need to pause here real quick. It is confusing to me that Abuela says that the candle blessed them with a miracle. I thought the candle was the miracle. Like, the miracle obviously was the fact that her life was spared and her children and their children have magical gifts for some reason. But the candle didn't come into being until after Pedro died. So if she's saying that the miracle came from the candle, then that still leaves the question of where did the candle come from? Like, why did Pedro's death cause this candle to appear? And why does she credit the candle as the source of the miracle rather than her late husband or God or whoever or whatever it is that's supposed to be the source of this? The reason I'm making such a point of this is because the film clearly wants to evoke a lot of religious imagery in relation to the magic of this family. This candle is a prayer candle. I mean, look at it. They're conducting some kind of coming-of-age ritual or ceremony, which seems very evocative of a baptism or christening or confirmation ceremony in Catholicism. We can now confirm that the story takes place in Colombia, where essentially everyone is Catholic. Now, I don't have a problem with this as a rule. This isn't the first Disney film to explicitly reference religion and prayer, or even to explicitly reference gods as part of its story, but Encanto seems to be trying to straddle this fine line where it makes use of religious imagery and symbolism without actually mentioning Catholicism or God specifically. What I'm getting at here is that it's a bit strange for the film to make such symbolic references to Christianity and Roman Catholicism in particular, but to then shy away from it in circumstances where it would make the most sense. For instance, if this is a Catholic family, then why doesn't Abuela just say that she's thankful for the miracle that God gave them instead of the miracle that the candle gave them? Mulan didn't shy away from direct references to ancestor worship, and in fact it is the direct intervention of those ancestors and her spirit guardian Mushu that eventually allows her to succeed in her quest. The writers of Hercules didn't shy away from the fact that Hercules is the son of a god, and at least two of those gods are principal characters in the film. To be clear, I don't think that either the inclusion or exclusion of religion or deity or religious or spiritual symbols is inherently good or bad in a story, or even specifically in a Disney movie. I think you just need to pick one. Either the family Madrigal is Catholic or they're not. What's confusing is to try to do this sort of half and half thing where we have a prayer candle and this deeply spiritual coming of age ceremony and a very conscientious grandmother who is trying to keep her family in the right way, but then to try to disconnect this imagery with the underlying religion on which it depends. This issue is going to keep coming up as we go through the film, so I don't want to beat the horse to death here, but the framing of this scene with Antonio's gift ceremony is very strange in that we seem to have a very religious event going on, but the matriarch isn't making any explicit references to religion. I don't know why they did this. The reason this is confusing is that there are many character decisions that only make sense in an explicitly religious context, and that are utterly baffling outside of that. Anyway, back to Antonio's ceremony. We see the curtains open, and little Antonio stands in the spotlight with all eyes upon him. He is petrified, unable to move. Seeing Mirabel nearby, he reaches towards her for help. She looks to her grandmother before saying, Undeterred, Antonio whispers. Relenting, Mirabel goes to his side and takes his hand. When Abuela sees this, her face becomes suddenly very concerned, since, as we saw in the previous scene, she is afraid to let Mirabel be involved in the ceremony. Nevertheless, she does not object, and Mirabel helps Antonio down the aisle and up the stairs towards his door. As they walk, we see a flashback of little Mirabel taking that same walk alone during her ceremony years earlier. In that flashback, we see her grandmother's warm and affectionate smile as little Mirabel places her hand on the door, only for the door to slowly disappear, leaving behind an empty wall. Abuela's smile melts into an expression of shock and fear, and little Mirabel turns to her grandmother with sorrow and confusion on her face. Coming back to the present, Mirabel sees her grandmother look at and speak to Antonio with the same warmth and affection that she once gave to her granddaughter. Everyone looks on with bated breath as Antonio places his hand on the doorknob. A swirl of light plays across the door, and a little bird flies out of nowhere to land on his arm. Antonio discovers to his delight that he can understand and speak with the bird. Animals of all kinds come flooding into the house to meet baby Dr. Dolittle, and Abuela breathes a sigh of relief, exclaiming,
We have a new gift.
Antonio opens the door to reveal an enormous jungle-themed bedroom and is ecstatic. Everyone is thrilled, including Abuela, who declares it to be
A gift just as special as you.
She calls for a family photo, and in the rush of it all, Mirabel is forgotten, and that's when she cracks. Okay, so in terms of the plot, this scene shows us that Mirabel helped Antonio complete his ceremony when he was too frightened to do it alone. We saw that Antonio received the gift of communicating with animals, and that Mirabel was subsequently left out of the family photo. The biggest question here is why Antonio's ceremony worked while Mirabel's did not. The mechanics of how the magic works have thus far not really been explained at all. This wasn't really a problem in the introduction, but now the mechanics of the magic are starting to influence character decisions, so the fact that nobody seems to know anything about how it works is starting to be a bit of an issue. Is there something about Mirabel that's broken? Is there something about her that's somehow not compatible with the magic? Is there some other reason why she didn't receive a gift? Was it the decorations after all? Were they just not good enough the last time around? I have no idea. As far as what this scene tells us about the characters, we see that Abuela attributes the magic of the Encanto to the candle itself, rather than to any other being or force or entity, or even to the sacrifice of her late husband. And although we know that she was reluctant to let Mirabel be involved in the ceremony in any way, when it became clear that Antonio specifically requested her help, Abuela permitted this to happen. We learn that Antonio can now communicate with animals, and we learn that Mirabel still vividly remembers the pain and disappointment of her own ceremony, and although she doesn't seem to blame Antonio, she very much envies the love and attention that is being lavished on him in this moment. She has tried not to give in to self-pity. She has tried to contribute to the family as much as she can, and she has tried, despite her limitations, to feel like she belongs as one of them. But this moment broke her. She has failed. So my biggest question here is, how in the world did every single member of the family not realize that Mirabel had been left out? I get that we're supposed to believe that Abuela is so preoccupied with the ceremony itself, or with the magic, or with Antonio, that she's just not really paying attention. Or perhaps that she kind of discounts Mirabel as a granddaughter altogether because she doesn't have magic and therefore isn't really hers. We'll have to wait and see how the film develops the specific relationship between Mirabel and her grandmother, but even leaving her aside for the moment, how did everybody else forget Mirabel? How did Antonio forget her? How did Mirabel's own parents forget her? Like, there isn't any reason for this. It can't even just be that Mirabel doesn't have magic, therefore nobody thinks she matters, because Agustin and Felix don't have magic either, but they managed to get in there. Nobody forgot about them. This doesn't really seem to make much sense. Even if nobody has any particular respect for Mirabel because she's just a normal person, we have still seen that she has very important relationships in this family, specifically with her parents and with her cousin Antonio, who definitely should have remembered her. Even Abuela, who seems to be trying to keep Mirabel at arm's length for the sake of the magic, doesn't treat her unkindly. This is such a pivotal moment in Mirabel's character arc, but it doesn't follow naturally from what we've seen. I can believe that Abuela might forget about Mirabel because she's apparently got a lot of other things on her mind. I can believe that Antonio might forget because despite the close relationship he has with his cousin, he's a child and is clearly super excited about his gift. I can believe that Isabella wouldn't care if Mirabel was gone because Isabella is apparently a terrible person who despises Mirabel anyway. We don't really know anything about her relationship with the other members of the family, except there is absolutely no way that Julieta would forget about her daughter. I simply do not believe that this character wouldn't notice that her daughter was missing. I similarly have a hard time believing that Agustin wouldn't realize that his daughter was missing, and that after realizing they had forgotten her, wouldn't care. This incident isn't mentioned again. Nobody acknowledges that this happened. Nobody apologizes for it. This is such a crucial moment in Mirabel's character arc, and it's such an utter contrivance that I cannot believe that this would really happen this way with these people. Up until this point, most of the characterization in the movie has been great, but this scene is starting to pick apart the character consistencies, and I only hope it doesn't get worse from here. And as I mentioned, there's the problem of the film trying to use religious imagery and symbolism while also trying to avoid any explicit reference to religion. This will continue to be an issue, and I will point out more examples of this as we go along. Anyway, Mirabel responds to this distress the way any good Disney character should. She sings a song about it. In contrast to her first song, which was all about how great her family is and how lucky she feels to be a part of it, this one is presumably much closer to how she really feels. She gives some shallow and unconvincing mantra about how she's not upset at all and she's totally fine, before finally admitting that she is not, in fact, fine. She can't do any of the special things that her family can do, and she can't spend another day up in her room waiting on a miracle, as she puts it. She says she always feels alone, always suffering under the constant invisible pain of desperately wanting to shine like others do, but being unable to. We also see an imaginary version of her grandmother, and Mirabel tells her that all she needs is a chance, repeating the phrase, "Open your eyes." She recounts once more the gifts of her family members, insisting that she would do these things if she could, directing her voice upward toward heaven or the candle or whatever the source of the magic is. She pleads, "I am ready. I've been patient and steadfast and steady. Bless me now, as you blessed us all those years ago." Okay, so the bubble has burst. All of Mirabel's anger, resentment, pain, and longing that we've seen simmering under a thin veneer of optimism have finally been laid bare. After all these years and all her attempts to be reconciled to her giftless condition, it still feels unfair, and it still hurts. And it seems that she's particularly hurt by the fact that her grandmother now looks at her as a problem that needs to be kept at arm's length. Subjectively, I found this song to be pretty moving. Objectively, it functions as a payoff for Mirabel's characterization that has been hinted at for the last 20 minutes. What was first communicated via sidelong glances and evasive language has now been declared openly. And once again, we have an example of the film trying to make reference to religious imagery and themes without explicitly mentioning what exactly that religion is. She is asking, praying, you might say, to the candle or God or something for her own gift, but who or what exactly she's making this request to is not made clear, since we still don't know where exactly this magic comes from, or even what anyone in the family believes regarding where the magic comes from. Then a roof tile falls and crashes to the floor of the courtyard. Mirabel gingerly picks it up and cuts her hand in the process. We see pieces of the house beginning to shake and rattle, and several large cracks run through the floor and up the walls. She watches in horror as the cracks spread throughout the house, converging on her grandmother's bedroom window, where the magical candle begins to fade and flicker. Panicked, she runs to the party still going on in Antonio's bedroom and shouts,
The house is in danger! The tiles were falling and there were cracks everywhere. And the candle almost went out.
But when Abuela and everyone else comes to see, the cracks and the broken roof tile have vanished and the candle is burning as brightly as ever. Clearly annoyed by the girl who cried wolf, Abuela turns to the crowd and declares,
Nothing wrong with La Casa Madrigal. The magic is strong.
So we've seen hints before that Abuela herself is somewhat worried about the condition of the magic, so she's either decided that Antonio's successful ceremony means that there's nothing to worry about after all, and Mirabel is just making stuff up for attention, or that perhaps she just doesn't want anyone else to be worried about it. Why she might choose to prioritize keeping up appearances rather than taking the problem seriously is not clear. We don't yet have any reason to believe that she understands how the magic works better than anyone else does, and in the face of uncertainty, maybe she just defaults to the mantra that if you act like everything's fine, then everything will be fine. As it is, we simply don't know why she's doing what she's doing. Also, we learned that Augustine can play the piano. Neat. Wait, why is Luisa holding the piano? Why doesn't she just put it on the wait a second. How did Dolores not hear the house falling apart? Like, this whole sequence was pretty loud. There were tiles rattling and crashing, and there was this weird eerie groan thing going on. I don't understand how she didn't hear this if her gift is super hearing. Maybe her hearing isn't actually as good as we were led to believe. Or maybe the whole thing was just in Mirabel's head. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Okay, so in this scene, in terms of what happens, Mirabel admits to herself how she really feels. She sees cracks in the house and the magic candle begins to dim, but when she tries to tell everyone about this, the cracks disappear and the candle seems just fine. And finally, Abuela assures everyone that nothing is wrong. The principal questions that come to my mind are, first of all, why are there cracks in the house and why is the candle fading? And then why the cracks vanished so quickly? And on a related note, was any of this real, or was it simply in Mirabel's imagination? In terms of character development, we see that Abuela does not seem to believe Mirabel's story, and she prioritizes keeping up appearances over investigating a potential problem with the magic. We learn that Mirabel, despite putting on a brave face, does actually feel bitter, disappointed, lonely, and confused because she didn't get a gift. And she desperately wants and prays / asks for a gift of her own. Casita, which you'll remember is the house, might be dying or falling apart, assuming that Mirabel did not imagine what she saw. We learn that Agustin can play the piano, and we learn that Dolores either did not hear the house crumbling to pieces, or perhaps she just chose not to back up Mirabel's story. The biggest questions I have about the character development in this scene is, to whom was Mirabel speaking when she asked for a miracle, which would tell us something about what she believes to be the source of the magic, and might give us some context for the religious themes that this movie seems to want to include. And I think it's also important to ask whether Abuela actually doubts Mirabel's story, or whether she was just putting on an act for the sake of the guests at the party. As far as other things, as I said, we have more religious imagery here without any solid context, as we see Mirabel offering a prayer to something or someone that isn't really explained or described in any way. And thirdly, I have to ask why Mirabel decided to run screaming into Antonio's room rather than telling her grandmother about what she had seen more privately. She could have pulled her aside and whispered it in her ear, or she could have waited until after the party and brought it up then, or she could have talked to her parents. By breaking the news in this way, Mirabel put her grandmother in a position where she had to choose between maintaining appearances for the sake of Antonio's party and taking Mirabel seriously. There are many ways that Mirabel could have told the family about what she saw, and I hope that the reason she chose this option will eventually have an answer other than because the writers wanted to contrive some drama. Anyway, moving on, we cut to Mirabel and her mother in the kitchen after the party. Mirabel says,
If it was all in my head, how did I cut my hand?
which seems to confirm that the cracking and rattling and crashing of the house was real and not in her imagination, which furthermore confirms what we said about Dolores in the previous scene, that either she has only sort of good hearing, or she just chose not to corroborate Mirabel's story when she could have. Julieta replies that tonight must have been very hard for her. That's not really an answer to Mirabel's question, but okay. Mirabel then says that she may not be as strong as Luisa or as perfect as Isabella, and I find myself having to ask again why people keep referring to Isabella as perfect. What does this mean? Or at least, what does it mean when Mirabel says it? She seems to be implying that Isabella's quote-unquote perfection is somehow related to her magical gift, but in what way? All we know so far is that she can make plants. Is that perfection, somehow? I know that in the introduction, Mirabel called her sister graceful, so is that what she's referring to? Is Isabella supposed to be supernaturally pretty or elegant or something? I mean, maybe, but in what way? My point is not that Isabella isn't perfect. My point is that I don't understand why Mirabel is calling her perfect. Isabella treats her pretty terribly, so more than anyone else, Mirabel should know that her sister is not, in fact, perfect. So what exactly does she mean by this? If it's just the way she looks or the way she moves, then I would still be a little bit confused, because Isabella doesn't actually look that different from anyone else in this family or even in the village. She just seems to have more makeup on, and I don't see how that's related to her plant powers at all. And if it's a reference to the way she walks or dances or something, then I'm still confused, because we've already seen that Mirabel herself is a pretty talented dancer. We've now heard the word perfect used in connection with Isabella many times, and I think at this point it would behoove the script to give us some idea of what this means, since this obviously seems to be an important factor in Mirabel's relationship with her sister. As long as this is eventually explained, this is fine. We'll have to see if that happens. Anyway, Julieta heals the cut on Mirabel's hand and tells her that she is perfect just the way she is, and that she's just as special as anyone else. Mirabel doesn't buy it, and she pushes her mother away, saying,
I know what I saw.
this line feels a little bit out of place. It's not really a response to what Julieta just said. This line would make more sense if it came right after Julieta had implied that Mirabel made up a story about the house falling apart in order to get attention, but instead it's placed here after Julieta insists that she considers Mirabel to be special. In response to Mirabel doubling down on her story, Julieta says,
Mira, my brother Bruno lost his way in this family. I don't want the same for you.
What? What does this mean, Bruno lost his way in the family? Mirabel is claiming that she saw the house falling apart and the magic candle threatening to blow out, and her mother apparently believes that she has either imagined it due to the emotional stress of the evening, or that she's just straight up lying in order to get attention. What does this have to do with losing her way in the family the same way Bruno did? And what would it even mean to lose her way in the family? We don't really know anything about Bruno at this point, but as it stands, this line from Julieta doesn't really make any sense. The best explanation I can come up with is that Julieta sees Mirabel's erratic behavior as some kind of last-ditch effort to feel like she belongs, and since that gambit has apparently failed, Mirabel's next move will be to give up, quit the family, and disappear like Bruno did. I guess this makes some sense if Julieta is not willing to even entertain the idea that Mirabel might be telling the truth, but I find it a bit hard to believe that Mirabel would be the first child in this family to tell a lie, and therefore the only one in danger of losing her way in the family. I know this is a bit of a stretch because we don't actually know anything about Bruno at this point, but I have to say that this seems like another instance of the script trying to evoke religious themes and ideas without bothering to put in any context or foundation to support it. It's a pretty common trope in stories to have a character who is ostracized from the group for failing to conform to certain social or cultural norms, or for breaking some kind of rule, or for just thinking differently than the others. And there are plenty of people in real life who feel alienated from their families because, for whatever reason, they either cannot or do not want to conform to the religious upbringing that they had. This seems to be what this line from Julieta about her brother losing his way in the family is trying to refer to, but at this point we have no understanding of what rules or norms or traditions Bruno may or may not have failed to adhere to, unless we have no understanding of what exactly Julieta is afraid is going to happen to her daughter that would be in any way similar to what happened to her brother. Maybe when we get some more information about Bruno, this line and this entire scene in general will make more sense. Maybe. Okay, so to recap this scene, in terms of plot, Julieta heals the cut on Mirabel's hand, and Julieta strongly implies to Mirabel that she does not believe her story about the cracks in the candle, and that she is afraid Mirabel will lose her way like Bruno did. In terms of character development, Mirabel insists that what she saw was real, while Julieta attributes her story to emotions and imagination, and as we said, believes that Bruno lost his way in the family and is afraid that Mirabel will do the same. There isn't really much in terms of plot, so I don't really have any questions in that respect, but in terms of characters, why does Julieta not believe Mirabel? What does it mean for Bruno and or Mirabel to lose their way in the family? And perhaps more importantly, is Mirabel the first person in history to be unhappy while eating an arepa?